Jesus once spoke a prophecy that most people overlook. He said, "As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man." But what exactly happened in the days of Noah that made Jesus use it as a warning for our generation? The answer lies in a story that was buried, censored, and almost erased from history. The story of the Nephilim, the fallen watchers, and a rebellion that didn't just corrupt the earth. It rewrote creation itself. This is not about literal giants walking among us today. This is about something far more dangerous, the return of the same spirit, the same rebellion, the same crossing of boundaries that brought judgment upon the ancient world. And if you look closely, you'll see it happening again. By the end of this video, you will understand why Jesus connected our time to Noah's, and why ignoring this warning could be the greatest mistake of our generation. But to understand what's returning, we must first understand what happened before the flood. Long before mankind built its first city, before empires rose and fell, there was a fracture in heaven. A rebellion so profound that it didn't just corrupt humanity. It created something that was never meant to exist. The book of Genesis mentions it briefly. The sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took wives from among them. Hidden within those few words is one of the darkest secrets in Scripture. The Nephilim were not born of chance. They were the result of angels, beings of light called the Watchers, who descended to earth, clothed in desire, taking mortal wives and giving birth to a generation of hybrids. Neither fully divine nor fully human. Their power was unmatched, their pride was infinite, and their corruption was unstoppable. Yet this is not just ancient history, because what began in the days of Noah still echoes through our world today. The same spirit that drove these beings to defy heaven continues to whisper in the heart of mankind. The desire to rise beyond the limits set by the Creator, to become gods without submission, to create without permission. To understand who the Nephilim truly were is to uncover the spiritual DNA of rebellion itself. This is not mythology. This is revelation. This is the hidden story of the Nephilim. Before the fall, before the flood, and before sin had carved its mark upon the human heart, there was a realm where light itself was alive. In that realm dwelled beings of unimaginable brilliance, the Bene Elohim, the sons of God. They were not born as men are born. They were spoken into existence by the Word, radiant reflections of divine thought, each bearing the essence of the Creator. Their purpose was order, harmony, and worship, an eternal song that kept creation in balance. But within that perfection lay the seed of choice, and with choice came the possibility of defiance. Among these celestial beings were the Watchers, guardians set over the earth, appointed to observe the affairs of men, but never to interfere. Yet as they watched humanity grow, something unexpected stirred within them. They saw beauty in fragility, courage in weakness, and a mysterious spark in the heart of mankind, something even angels could not comprehend. What began as wonder soon turned into envy, and envy into desire. The boundary between reverence and temptation began to blur, and in that blur, a fracture formed, one that would soon shatter heaven's order. The ancient book of Enoch describes how 200 of these watchers, led by a mighty being named Semjaza, swore a solemn oath upon the heights of Mount Hermon. They vowed to descend together so none would bear the guilt alone. It was not only lust that drove them, it was ambition. They sought to create as God had created, to shape life by their own will. In their hearts, pride whispered the oldest lie, "You shall be as gods." And so, clothed in radiant bodies, they crossed the veil between realms, leaving behind the eternal for the temporal, the divine for the dust. When their feet touched the earth, heaven trembled. What was once holy had entered a realm unprepared for such glory. They took wives from among the daughters of men, and from this forbidden union were born the Nephilim, beings of great stature and unmatched might. But their greatness came with corruption. They carried the essence of rebellion in their very blood, a distortion of the Creator's design. Their birth marked the moment when heaven's order collided with earth's fragility, and from that collision, a new kind of darkness was born. When the Watchers descended, the world was still young, a place untouched by kingdoms or empires, where the voice of God still echoed through mountains and rivers. Humanity lived in simplicity, yet carried within it the image of the divine. Into this purity came the brilliance of the fallen. They appeared not as monsters, but as beings of dazzling beauty and knowledge. To the eyes of men, they were gods who walked among mortals. And so, the daughters of men welcomed them, not realizing that what they embraced was not divine love, but the shadow of rebellion clothed in light. The union of the celestial and the mortal was never meant to exist. It violated the structure of creation itself. The sons of God were beings of spirit, eternal, radiant, incorruptible. Humanity was of the dust, bound to time and limitation. Yet when those two forces merged, a new creation emerged, one that the heavens had not ordained. The offspring of this forbidden union, the Nephilim, were unlike anything the earth had ever seen. They were giants not only in size, but in intellect, power, and arrogance. Their very presence disrupted the balance of nature, and even the elements seemed to tremble before them. These hybrids carried both divine light and spiritual corruption. They possessed knowledge beyond human comprehension, the secrets of the stars, the art of war, the manipulation of nature. The Book of Enoch tells how the Watchers taught humanity forbidden things, enchantments, weaponry, cosmetics, astrology, gifts that would corrupt rather than enlighten. What was meant to be a blessing turned into a curse. The Nephilim became tyrants, devouring not only the land, but the hearts of men, ruling over them as gods demanding worship. Humanity, once made in God's image, began to bow before its own destruction, and heaven watched in silence for a time. The cries of the oppressed rose like smoke before the throne, and the earth itself groaned beneath the weight of this corruption. The union that began in desire had birthed a generation of chaos, a race that stood as living proof of rebellion's cost. And though the world admired their power, heaven mourned their existence. For every heartbeat of the Nephilim was a reminder that divine boundaries, once crossed, can never be undone without consequence. The earth was no longer innocent. It had become the battlefield between light and corruption. The birth of the Nephilim did more than alter humanity. It corrupted the very fabric of creation. The divine essence that once flowed through the earth began to darken, poisoned by the mixture of the eternal and the mortal. What had been pure began to decay. Animals became violent, men became greedy, and even nature seemed to echo the rebellion of heaven. The scriptures say, all flesh had corrupted its way upon the earth. The corruption was not only moral, it was genetic, spiritual, and cosmic. The world itself was mutating under the weight of defiance. The Nephilim, though born of divine seed, had lost the harmony of heaven. Their hearts were filled with hunger that could never be satisfied. They devoured everything, crops, herds, and eventually human life itself. The Book of Giants describes them as devourers of men, a race that consumed both flesh and spirit. And as they ruled over mankind, they turned knowledge into control and wisdom into sorcery. They built cities of grandeur, but beneath their towers, the blood of the innocent cried out to heaven. The light that once radiated from the Watchers now burned as a fire of domination. And so, the image of God in man began to fade. Humanity, once crowned with glory, now bowed to idols made in the likeness of its oppressors. Rituals, sacrifices, and the worship of the fallen became common practice. The Watchers had taught men how to summon spirits, command the stars, and pierce the veil between worlds, but at the cost of their souls. What was once a world governed by divine law had become a realm enslaved to forbidden power. Heaven's light had not disappeared. It had been twisted, turned inward, burning everything it touched. The corruption was total. The earth, drenched in blood and deception, became a shadow of its creator's design. But even in the midst of this darkness, a remnant remained, those who still called upon the name of the Lord. To them, the presence of the Nephilim was not a myth, but a nightmare written across generations. It was then that heaven decided to act, not with thunder, nor with flame, but with something far greater, judgment. The flood that would soon come was not merely a storm. It was a cleansing of creation itself, an act of divine mercy disguised as wrath. The earth had become a graveyard of light. What was once the masterpiece of creation now pulsed with violence and corruption. The cries of the innocent rose day and night before the throne of heaven, and the Almighty's heart was grieved. The scriptures record his words, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. This was not a sentence. It was a countdown. Heaven's patience was reaching its limit. The divine realm had watched long enough as the Nephilim defiled the earth, and now justice would descend like the weight of the oceans themselves. But even in wrath, there was grace. Among the chaos, one man still walked with God, Noah. In him, the purity of creation had not been extinguished. The book of Genesis says he was perfect in his generations, meaning untainted by the corruption of angelic blood. Through Noah, God would preserve the original design of mankind. He became the bridge between a dying world and a reborn creation. The ark was not merely a vessel of wood, it was a symbol, a covenant carved into time, declaring that even in judgment, mercy still breathes. As the first drops of rain began to fall, the watchers saw their end approaching. The book of Enoch describes their terror, how they pleaded for forgiveness, how they begged Enoch to intercede on their behalf. But heaven had already decreed their fate. Their cries could not undo the rebellion they had birthed. The floodgates of heaven opened, and the fountains of the deep erupted. The world was engulfed in waters that erased the footprints of the Nephilim, cities of stone swallowed by silence. The giants, once worshipped as gods, drowned as mortals, their voices lost in the roar of divine justice. When the waters receded, the world was silent again. The corruption had been purged, the watchers were bound in the abyss, and the Nephilim's legacy was buried beneath the layers of time. Yet the story did not end there. Fragments of their bloodline lingered, faint traces hidden among men. The flood cleansed the earth, but it did not cleanse memory. The spirits of the Nephilim, now disembodied, became what ancient texts call unclean spirits, restless, wandering, and forever seeking a host. The war that began before the flood would continue in unseen realms until the end of the age. When the flood consumed the earth, the bodies of the Nephilim perished, but their spirits did not. They were not born of pure flesh nor of pure spirit. They were hybrids, bound to both realms but belonging to neither. Heaven rejected them, for they were not fully divine. The underworld had no claim on them, for they were not fully mortal. So they became wanderers, disembodied shadows drifting between worlds. The book of Enoch calls them the evil spirits upon the earth, cursed to roam until the final judgment. They became what we now call demons. These spirits inherited the hunger and corruption of their former bodies, but without form, their thirst grew even deeper. They craved embodiment, to feel, to influence, to dominate once again. And so they sought habitation in men, whispering in thoughts, feeding on fear, manipulating desire. Every empire built on pride, every war fueled by greed, carries the same signature, the echo of the Nephilim spirit. They are the ancient architects of rebellion, still shaping the patterns of sin in unseen ways. Their war did not end with the flood. It merely changed its battlefield. The scriptures give glimpses of their influence. When Jesus cast out demons, they begged not to be sent into the abyss, the same prison where their angelic fathers were bound. They recognized his authority because he was the very word their rebellion had defied. In that moment, Two histories collided, the corruption that began before the flood and the redemption that came through the cross. What once enslaved mankind through fear and deception would now tremble at the sound of one name. The power that once fell from heaven had finally met the power that came from it. Even now their presence lingers, not as monsters in the shadows, but as whispers that fuel pride, violence, and self-worship. They inhabit systems, cultures, and hearts that reject divine truth. The same ambition that drove the Watchers still breathes in every soul that seeks glory apart from God. But the revelation remains. What was born of rebellion can never overpower what was born of redemption. The giants of old may have fallen, but their story reminds us that the true battle was never about flesh. It was always about the spirit. When the floodwaters receded and Noah stepped onto dry ground, it seemed that the age of the giants had ended. Yet Scripture offers subtle, haunting words. There were giants on the earth in those days, and also after that. How could that be, if all flesh had been destroyed? The truth lies in the mystery of hidden survival. Through intermarriage, through corruption of bloodlines, or perhaps through the reappearance of fallen spirits influencing mankind again, fragments of the Nephilim legacy endured. They would rise again under new names: the Anakim, the Rephaim, the Emim, and the Zamzumim, tribes that terrified Israel and defied the purposes of God. These bloodlines were not ordinary. They carried traces of the same arrogance and strength that had once filled the pre-flood world. Goliath of Gath, the giant slain by David, was one of their descendants. His height was not his true weapon, it was his defiance. Every story of a giant in Scripture represents more than physical stature. It symbolizes the persistence of rebellion. Through these surviving lineages, the spirit of the Nephilim continued its war against the covenant people, attempting to corrupt the promised land before the arrival of the Messiah. The ancient conflict was not over. It had merely changed form. The Canaanite nations built their cities atop high hills and mountains, symbolic thrones of false gods. Archaeologists have uncovered remnants of their worship, colossal idols, ritual altars, and serpentine symbols carved into stone. These were not mere cultural relics. They were invitations, gateways for the same ancient powers that had once walked the earth. Each act of pagan worship echoed the rebellion of the Watchers. The world called them gods, but heaven recognized them as remnants of a broken past, and Israel's battles were not only against armies of flesh, but against unseen forces that guided them. Throughout history, these hidden bloodlines would fade from view, yet their influence would resurface in strange myths and ancient religions, from Babylon to Greece, from Egypt to Rome. The names changed, but the essence remained. Kings sought divine status, empires worshipped stars and angels, and mankind continued to repeat the same error, trying to reach heaven without God. The story of the Nephilim did not vanish with the flood. It was woven into the DNA of civilization itself. And though their bodies turned to dust, their rebellion became part of human nature, an echo that still resounds in every age. Time buried the giants, but not their ideology. The world may no longer see beings of towering stature walking among men, but their rebellion, it never left. This is what Jesus was warning us about. When he said, "As it was in the days of Noah," he wasn't just talking about moral decay or violence. He was pointing to something deeper, a spiritual condition, a world consumed by the same hunger that drove the Watchers to cross forbidden boundaries. The same desire to become gods without submission. The same arrogance that believes creation can be rewritten, that limits can be ignored, that man can ascend without obedience. Look around. We live in a generation that manipulates DNA, seeks to transcend mortality, and attempts to merge flesh with machine. The dream of the fallen has been resurrected, not in temples of stone, but in laboratories, ideologies, and philosophies that promise divinity without God. The boundaries heaven established are no longer seen as sacred. They are seen as limits to be broken, And every time mankind crosses a line that was never meant to be crossed, the veil between realms grows thinner, and something ancient stirs behind it. In Noah's day, humanity worshipped the Nephilim as gods. Today we worship ourselves. The temples have changed form. They are digital, cultural, ideological, but the altars remain the same. Everywhere the symbols return, the all-seeing eye, the winged beings, the serpent promising enlightenment. Ancient gods reappear, not as statues, but as philosophies offering power, freedom, and transcendence. And beneath their shimmering light lies the same lie whispered in Eden: "You shall be as gods." The return of the giants is not about physical beings walking the earth again. It's about the return of their spirit, the same rebellion, the same corruption, the same pattern repeating itself before our very eyes. The enemy's strategy has never changed. Corruption through knowledge, domination through fear, and the twisting of truth into the illusion of freedom. Jesus saw this moment coming. He knew that just as the world once laughed at Noah while he built the ark, our generation would laugh at the idea of coming judgment. They built, they traded, they celebrated, unaware that the very air they breathed was counting down to its end. And today, the same blindness. The signs are everywhere: the distortion of creation, the worship of self, the silencing of truth. The spiritual flood has already begun, not of water, but of deception. From the moment the serpent deceived Eve, a prophecy was spoken: "I will put enmity between your seed and her seed." It was not a metaphor. It was a declaration of war. From that day forward, two bloodlines began to move through history, one born of obedience, the other of rebellion. The sons of light and the sons of darkness. The Nephilim were the first fruits of that unholy seed, a manifestation of what happens when heaven's order is defied. And though their bodies perished, their spiritual legacy became the invisible hand that guides kingdoms, ideologies, and empires. Every generation since has been a battlefield for that ancient war. The prophets saw it clearly. They spoke of nations ruled by gods of deception, of rulers influenced by unseen powers. Daniel described princes over Persia and Greece, not men but spiritual rulers in rebellion. Paul echoed it centuries later, reminding us that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. The battle between the seeds is not fought with swords, but with allegiance. Whom we serve, whom we believe, whom we worship. Every human choice becomes a weapon in this unseen conflict, and every heart becomes a throne where light or darkness reigns. Through the ages, the enemy's strategy has remained the same: corruption through knowledge, domination through fear, and the twisting of truth into freedom. The same lies spoken in Eden are repackaged in every generation. You can be your own God. The seed of rebellion still tries to root itself in every human soul. Yet God's promise stands unbroken. Through the lineage of the woman came another offspring, one who would crush the serpent's head. The Son of Man did what no Nephilim, no Watcher, no fallen spirit could do. He bridged heaven and earth without corruption. He became the divine union, not through rebellion, but through obedience. And that's why the war continues even now. The enemy fears those who carry that same spirit, those who walk in the authority of the one who overcame death. Every generation faces the same question whispered in the beginning: whose seed will you bear? The world offers the illusion of divinity without submission. Heaven offers restoration through surrender. The giants fell, the watchers were chained, yet their rebellion still echoes through culture and desire. But the victory was sealed long ago, and the final battle is not about power, but about inheritance. Only one bloodline will remain. Yet within the rising storm, a remnant is awakening. Those who see beyond the illusion. They hear the ancient echo, "Come out of her, my people." They recognize the pattern, the cycle repeating, the return of the days of Noah, not as history, but as prophecy unfolding. These are the watchmen, the voices crying in the wilderness of this modern age. They understand that the battle is no longer about survival, but about alignment, aligning with the eternal kingdom before the final cleansing comes again, not with water, but with fire. The ark today is no longer made of wood, it is made of faith. The world sleeps, unaware that heaven is stirring once more. Just as the floodgates once opened, another reckoning approaches, not to destroy, but to restore. The story of the Nephilim is not just a tale of the past, it is a mirror reflecting the present. We are living in the age of convergence, when the ancient rebellion meets its final consequence. And in the midst of that darkness, a light is rising again. The same light that shattered the chains of the fallen and opened the heavens for mankind. The question remains, when the Son of Man returns, will he find faith upon the earth? Through the long ages of rebellion, God's plan never changed, to reclaim what was his, not by force, but by love. The fallen sought to blend heaven and earth through corruption. God would unite them through redemption. In the fullness of time, he sent one who carried both the divine and the human, not through rebellion, but through obedience. The Son of Man became what the Watchers could never be, a perfect union between Creator and creation. Through him, heaven touched earth once more, and this time the veil did not tear in defiance, but in mercy. On the cross, the ancient war reached its turning point. The blood that fell upon the ground cried louder than the blood of Abel. It was the reversal of every curse, the cleansing of every corrupted seed. Where the Nephilim brought destruction through forbidden union, Christ brought restoration through divine surrender. The darkness that once claimed dominion over mankind was stripped of its authority. The same power that the fallen had sought through disobedience was now restored through sacrifice. Heaven reclaimed its image in man, and the chains of the unseen were shattered forever. Through his resurrection, a new bloodline was born, not of flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. Those who believe become heirs of this restored covenant, carriers of divine light in mortal form. The story of the Nephilim ends where the story of redemption begins. For every fallen spirit still whispering deceit, there is a greater spirit whispering truth. Every corrupted seed meets the fire of divine renewal. The Son of Man did not just conquer death, he restored the blueprint of creation itself, the harmony between heaven and earth that rebellion once destroyed. And now the call echoes through the ages. Come up higher. The invitation once reserved for angels is now offered to mankind. Through Christ, humanity has been lifted above the ruins of the past and seated in heavenly places. The giants fell, the watchers were chained, but the sons and daughters of God rise once more, not as rebels but as redeemed. The war that began in heaven ends in victory on earth. The story that began with forbidden union ends with holy restoration. The bloodline is redeemed, and the kingdom of light reigns forever. The story of the Nephilim is not just an ancient tale buried in forgotten scrolls. It is a mirror held before every generation. It reveals the cost of rebellion, the danger of pride, and the mercy of a God who restores what was lost. The giants may have fallen, but the spirit of their defiance still walks among us, in every heart that seeks glory apart from its creator. Yet within that same humanity lies the hope of redemption, a light that cannot be extinguished, no matter how deep the shadow grows. Every prophecy, every ancient mystery, and every word of Scripture points to one truth. The war between heaven and darkness is not about domination, it is about restoration. God is not searching for power, he already holds it. He is searching for hearts willing to return. The Watchers fell by pride, but mankind rises by surrender. The same divine breath that once spoke the stars into existence now calls your name, not to fear, but to awaken. You were never meant to live as a shadow of the fallen. You were meant to shine as a reflection of the divine. The rebellion of the Nephilim may have altered history, but it could not erase destiny. Every soul that returns to the source becomes part of the restoration, part of the eternal design. The days of Noah have returned, but so has the voice that once called for refuge. The ark is open again, and this time its door is the cross. So ask yourself, which legacy will you carry? The pride of the fallen or the light of the redeemed? The story has always been more than myth. It is a warning and a promise. The bloodline has been restored, the war has been won, and the kingdom is awakening within those who still believe. If this message reached your spirit, then your awakening has already begun. Subscribe to Luminous Source and walk with us as we uncover the mysteries of the divine, the secrets written in light, the truths hidden from the beginning of time. Because this is more than history, this is revelation.